Hello, puppies and kittens. Once again, I have Allison Gill representing American Atheists, and we are talking about the reality check report, which is related to the secular survey that we talked about last time. So, what is the additional information that you have for us, Allison?
Sure. Well, this is the report on the U.S. Secular Survey. So 34,000 non-religious people from all across the country last October and November got together and took this survey online. And we finally had the results, and they're here. So I'm really excited about it. You can read the results at www.secularsurvey.org. And we published a 60-page sort of report on the analysis. So we have all sorts of things about the community, how they identify, where the respondents are from, issues they face in their lives like stigma or discrimination, how they build community, like who belongs to national or local organizations and what are they looking for from those organizations, what are their policy priorities, how often they vote, which is actually much higher than expected. It's among the highest population of anybody, which I found really interesting. So anyway, it's just a fascinating look at our community, and I think I think you'll really enjoy it.
Speaking personally, I would reflect that perhaps that highest voting rate is a very recent occurrence.
I don't know. Now, there has been some research on the issue by, for example, PRI and Pew Research Center that say that religiously unaffiliated people have a lower rate of voting than the general populace. But we're not talking about that group. We're that broad group of about 25% of the population. We're talking about specifically non-religious people that are atheist or humanist or skeptic, etc. And therefore, what we saw was a much higher rate of voting. It was, I think, about 95% of people were registered to vote. And hold on, I'll pull up the graph and have the exact information, so I'm not making it up.
Yeah, I get frequent requests like on phone calls or whatever, trying to make sure that I'm registered to vote and I'm going to vote. And I'm like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We got that.
I think it's important because lawmakers, I mean, that's the sort of thing that will help us build political power in the long run. If lawmakers understand that we're a community that pays attention, cares about various issues, and that we vote,
I would have to say that just the state of things on a national level would imply that we haven't always been active voters. And I know I started this by saying, speaking personally, because I was not that politically involved decades ago.
Yeah.
I just kind of left this in the hands of the people that I thought were qualified to do their jobs. And that's why they got elected, right? So I didn't much worry about it. But that was the 1980s. I came to find out better later on.
Yeah. Well, this is a snapshot in time, so I can't talk about what's in the past. We can only talk about what we see today. And I think it's a pretty remarkable report. One of my biggest takeaways that I found most interesting was just the sheer disparity of people's experiences in more liberal areas of the country versus more religious areas of the country. So we do a lot of analysis that shows, we ask people what sort of communities they lived in. Were they not very religious or were they very religious? And there's a few gradations in between. And we found that there was higher stigma, much higher discrimination in more religious areas. And also that people are more likely to conceal their identities, more likely to conceal the fact that they're not religious, which is, anecdotally what we all expect. But now we have actual data to back up what we think is true and show that this is something that is it's a real problem. It's something we need to address. So I think it also tells people, like, it's easy for me living in DC, being non-religious is not that big a deal. Okay. And I grew up in New Jersey, same thing. But it's hard to give someone like me who's never lived in a place like Texas context about what that place is like, to help us understand that we need to, be supportive of folks who live there who might be facing real issues. So I think it will help us build a stronger community overall as a non-religious movement.
I think it was late 60s, early 70s when Madalyn Murray O'Hair, founder of American Atheists, made statements to the effect that a majority of atheists in the demographic then were sitting in church pews.
Mm-hmm.
That instead of identifying as atheists, most of them tended to identify as Methodist or something like that.
Yeah.
And so what is the trend now? As I've been seeing another published number of curves, but I haven't had a chance to vet them. I know that a few years ago, it was fair to say that atheism was on the rise in all 50 states,
Mm-hmm.
and that we were the fastest growing demographic worldwide, as well as here in the United States, with regard to religion. But I've seen, as I said, as yet unvetted reports that decline is steeping, that it's becoming even more dramatic.
Sure, I can't really talk about that, but I want to make one thing clear. When you say we're the fastest growing and the largest sort of block within the categories, you're talking about religiously unaffiliated people. So that's a little bit broader category that includes some people that identify as, you know, believing in a higher deity or something. I think of that block of unaffiliated people, I think something like 60% say, or say something like religion is very important to me. So I have the exact stats on that. But regardless,
I've seen reports like that, and the interesting way that they're phrasing that is that there's a large number of these people that say that religion is important, but not to me.
oh yeah,
You know, and so if you think that religion is important to other people, and you don't have religion yourself, and well then, why not just come out and call yourself the A word? What is the problem there?
right. Well, I mean, part of it is the questions that they're asking. So of the 25%, or about a quarter that fall in that religiously unaffiliated section, about 9% are atheist or agnostic in the way they're asked their questions. And that percentage is also growing over time, but it's not growing at the same rate, as you were just saying, as this broader unaffiliated category. So I can't speak to the rate of incline there, or whether it's decreasing. We just don't have the data on that.
Well, then we'll talk about doing another survey at another time, because that's one I want to get to. I want to know.
And they're definitely going to study that. PRI and Pew, that's the sort of research they do. But our research is a little bit different. This is not a big population research that shows like percentage gain or loss over time. This is a real focused study on our community. So we focused on asking our community things about non-religious people specifically and their lives, in order to get a much deeper dive into our issues.
So you mentioned that there was some things about like people hiding their identities and everything. Like, what sort of data did you get along those lines?
Sure. So in the report, we actually created what are called scales. So we asked a number of different questions that are related around concealment. For example, we asked people how often they conceal their non-religious identity, either never, rarely, sometimes, mostly, or always, with different categories of people. For example, people at school, strangers, people at work, extended family, family of origin, and friends and acquaintances. And by looking at those percentages, we're able to sort of average them in different areas and come up with what we call a concealment score. And then with the concealment score, we see an average, right? And when we can sort of compare it in different places, like we can look at it in different states, we can look at it for people that have higher levels of stigma, we can look at it in different ways and see how things are affecting the likelihood that people conceal their identities in different circumstances. So it's a fascinating report in that way. It was conducted by this really great scientific research group called Strength in Numbers Consulting, who is based in New York, who provided really the analytical power. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a scientist, so it's I could not do this by ourselves, but they really provided a lot of assistance here.
We were at a really polarizing time right now. I mean, I've gotten a number of other reports, anecdotal reports from various viewers and such that are talking about how polarized their families are, their friends, how everything is fitting into a black and white dichotomy. If anything is perceived to be mildly left of center, it's automatically labeled communist. As a matter of fact, somebody accused me again yesterday, saying, I can't support you anymore now that I realize you're communist. Like, right. Wow, when did I haven't realized that. I realized that I'm not. So what is the problem? But everything has to fit into a black and white thing, and there's purists on both sides of that particular balance, where if anybody perceives any difference from however they are, then you automatically discount every ally you might have had in other things.
Right.
And I'm sorry to say that attitude seems to be across the board.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going on with this. It doesn't seem to be limited necessarily just to the United States either. I see that kind of attitude developing in Australia and in Europe. And
the sort of level of dogmatism. I understand what you mean. And yeah, it is unfortunate. And I'll tell you, just from our perspective, in my perspective in DC, I work in coalition all the time with all sorts of groups that we don't agree on everything. Like I work on, I work with religious groups sometimes on church-state separation issues. That they agree on some of them, but not others. And it's essential to really make change and cooperate and make a difference to work with other groups, to work with other people. If you can't do that, then you're just screaming on the internet. You're not actually making change. So I don't know. I feel like we've lost the ability in some ways. Maybe it's because of the internet to really understand each other and to reach resolution and to have these difficult communication.
Yeah, I find that nuance in a conversation can only seemingly exist when you're face to face in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that is. People are willing to treat you in that kind of civility, but not on the internet. Just like not at all. And you have to be very careful in these text-based conversations, and any of them you have, because the slightest thing will trigger a negative response of just wiping out everything that you've said. And I've had to say many times on stage, I've said I don't agree with anybody about everything.
Right.
That doesn't exist. I have to accept that everybody that I meet, yourself, my wife, everybody else that I meet, even the people that I admire. I mean, there are people that I do admire that I also disagree with about a whole lot. Matter of fact, everybody I can think of that I ever admired, I also disagree with, probably on something significant somewhere. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to discount everything else.
Nobody in the world has a completely identical, ideas and concepts and ideology to everybody else. I mean, that's just natural.
And on that same point, when people disagree, it used to be possible to disagree politely without doing the bullshit excuse about, well, let's agree to disagree. It was possible to disagree with somebody without hating them.
Yeah.
Or without making broad brush assertions and doing that fallacy.
Putting them in a box and just discounting that box, like, oh, you're what is it? What is the term they use? SJW or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's
whatever the politically poisoning term of the new year is. Yeah. I know what the politically poisoning term of this year is. It's the TDS, the Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
And that way you can dismiss every legitimate complaint about the worst president we've ever had.
So I'm not going to make a broad statement, but there's many things this administration has done that we have come out against as an organization. So that's about what I'll say on the political front there.
Okay, well, that's wise, and I shouldn't have gone there. It was just the easiest punchline to make in the moment, given that subject.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we going to do with this reality check report, and why do you call it that?
Well, because it comes back to the issue I was talking about before with like two different sort of Americas, two different worlds for non-religious people in non-religious sort of cities versus people in very religious areas. The idea was, it was sort of a play on words because we're atheists. So like reality, hey, this is about reality, but it's also showing that, the point was that people have a very hard time in some areas of our country. And I think, we don't consider that enough. American Atheists, we get complaints all the time, and other psych organizations do too, about parents whose children are being bullied or harassed in school because they're non-religious, about people who have problems at work, about people being denied government services because they don't want to go to get them from a church, all sorts of things like that. That happens.
Which they made it legal to do that kind of discrimination now.
That's exactly the problem. And about complaints about feeling ostracized because they have God We Trust on every plastered on every surface of the school now. So you get the idea. And if we don't, we need a way to call it out. And also we want to have actual quantitative data, because that's what we need to support policy change. We need to have that so we can go to lawmakers and say, actually, this is what's happening. We can prove it. This is the effects it's having on our population, and this is why you should care. And now we have that, and I think it's going to make a real difference for our community in the long run.
I hope that's true, but I've seen so many confrontations with people that set out one set of criteria, and then when you show explicitly that their candidate has completely gone the opposite direction of what they say, and you do what we don't care. That's the answer. They're going to continue to support that candidate anyway.
Yeah,
doesn't matter. Here in Texas, people think that they are born into a Republican Party and that they owe that party some loyalty because they were born into it. That's a bizarre thought to me. I mean, how you
religion
don't
works too, quite honestly, right?
I'm sorry, what?
It's how religion works too, quite honestly, right?
It is. I've just never understood that mindset. I mean, is there no independent thought? I mean, you don't get your policies from your parents. Who gets their policies from their parents?
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah, the problem is also most people don't consider policy. It's all pure tribalism, right? For most politics, like, there's nothing logically connecting and being anti-abortion and supporting gun rights. Nothing, right? But those are wedded together in this sort of just happenstance ideological framework. So anyway, we're a little bit, far afield,
I've been told that whether I accept mainstream science is dependent on my political perspective.
That is, yeah.
That I'm going to take certain scientific perspectives only if I'm a libtard, and otherwise I'm going to take a religious view over science. I mean, that's absurd, and I would like to see much less polarization in our country. Yeah. It seems to me that when we were young, then, or at least when I was young, there seemed to be the mainstream was that most people believed that science was reliable and actual factual stuff. You would be a fool to deny science. It would be literally a reality denier. But at the same time, everybody had this notion that you go somewhere when you die. Okay, and that was just an overlap of the two perspectives, and most people were in that line. And now we have this huge polarization where we have more people dropping away from religion in record numbers in every state and so forth. But at the same time, the same percentage, we have an increase in religious extremism, flat earth and creationism, geocentrism, and that sort of thing. How could both of these statistics be true at the same time? And that's because people are walking away from religion altogether. And on the other side, people are walking away from science altogether. And this leaves us in a complete polarizing divide.
I think it has to do, honestly, I mentioned this a second ago, but with the echo chambers we live in these days. I mean, everything, especially these days when no one can leave their house, everything's on the internet, right? And on the internet, if you use social media, you're hearing from your friends who all share your similar beliefs. And if we all live in we get to choose our media and consume it from certain places. If we live in echo chambers all day long, and we're judged at how well, in many cases we're judged at how well we adhere to those echo chambers and those belief systems. We're evaluated based on how much we dislike Trump, or how much we would fight anybody who disagrees with him on anything. Then that's the sort of behavior that we'll see more and more of. It's not conducive to having a multilateral sort of democracy.
And it's not just your friends and family that are doing this. Once upon a time, the internet was a great way to get some normalcy, some balance, because when you type in something, you're going to get both sides of the question answered. But now everything's following an algorithm, so that the internet has become an echo chamber too.
Yes.
So it's like looking into somebody's browser history is almost like looking into their own mind. And there are people in my family who get their news from much scarier sources than Fox News. I mean, the more extreme right wing.
It really bothers me that One American News, or that one is really becoming more popular, and the president's supporting it, because that is some crazy stuff.
Yep, more polarization, more us against them, more tribalism.
Right. And I don't know how to solve that, but this report is a way for us to learn more about our community, at least, and to get some real scientific data out there about our community, non-religious people in America. And that's why we really, because everybody has perceptions, everybody has anecdotes, but now we actually can say something substantive about our community, and in ways that I hope we'll be able to use to make change. And, of course, people are going to discount data sometimes, but I find it to be really helpful when you're going to speak with your representative or lawmaker and you have some stats to back up what you're saying,
Oh, we can just dismiss that now. It's all fake news.
I don't know. I mean,
whatever we can prove to be true is fake news, and whatever I pulled out of my butt is the revealed truth.
Well, you just mentioned a second ago how sometimes you can get people to agree with you when you're in the same place with them too. And so, going to speak with your lawmakers in person, and that can make a difference. And,
Has anybody done that? I mean, I've actually gone into, Capitol buildings and trying to, like in California as well in Texas, and trying to talk directly with lawmakers. I have to go with like lobbying groups because they never want to talk to me one on one.
You certainly can. You can definitely go on one-on-one too. If you're a constituent, every office of lawmaker has what's called I forget the term, but they have like little constituent offices in their district, right? District offices, that's the term. And so basically, I know they're all in the Capitol most of the time. However, they all have district offices, and any constituent can walk into a district office and ask to speak with someone. You can call ahead of time and set up a meeting, and they'll almost always meet with you and take, to listen to you. And if you're
that wasn't my situation when I tried to talk to Cornyn.
Oh, well,
yeah, just
I can help. You should let me know, and I'll schedule meetings for you, and it'll be great.
That sounds like a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
I may in fact do that, but more for the common person.
Yeah.
All right. So, what else can we say about this data and where we're going to go from here?
Sure. Well, we're definitely going to publish additional analyses of subcategories. Like, for example, we saw some really interesting disparities among young people. And so I want to publish a mini report based on this data about young non-religious people and their lives and what they see and how they build community, all that sort of thing. And I'd like to work with, and I want to do all these jointly with other organizations. Like, for example, we talked a little bit with Secular Student Alliance to put that together, which would be really fantastic. So we're hopefully going to do those in several different areas. We're also going to keep promoting this over the course of over the year. We just put out an action alert asking folks to send the report to their lawmakers so that they're aware of it and that they know that they have constituents that are atheists, right? And they have to take that into account when representing them.
There's another important point to bring up. There was one of our activists in Amarillo. They had a number of senatorial candidates. They were all gathered in one auditorium. And so somebody in the audience, the type of debate that they were having. And so one of these activists stood up and asked all of these candidates, how would you represent your atheist constituents? And all of these candidates are looking at each other in confusion until one finally answers, says, our constituents are Christian.
Wow. Yes, that's exactly my point. So when I'm doing lobbying trainings, that's one of the major points I raise is that, you by going in there and just having conversations with them, you show them that you are an atheist who lives in their community, so they know you exist. And so I think that can make a real difference. And that you tell them your story so that they know about people and what their lives are like in their communities.
By the way, I was meant to do a shout out to Kentucky CPS. Sorry it took a while to get to you. But that was something that was scrolling along in the chat. I had to bring that up because we're live at this moment.
Right.
All right, Allison, what else? Take it over.
Sure. Well, we looked at, let's see, what are some other aspects of this I should look at? One thing I thought was interesting also was family rejection. So we looked at basically people who faced rejection by their families when they were under 25 years old. So either people currently under 25 or those who are older, and it was more retrospective of the people that knew that were out and their parents knew that they were atheists, basically. And we saw very high levels of family rejection, unfortunately. About more than 1/3, 37% said their parents were somewhat or very unsupportive of their non-religious identity. And we looked at the result of that. We found that those people had a much higher degree of depression. Those folks who faced very unsupportive parents were 71.2% more likely than those with very supportive parents to have depression. So we can see the psychological outcomes of these sorts of results, which then we can also use to talk about the importance of, tolerance within families. Like we were talking about before, we can talk about the importance and how much it makes a difference to be open and accepting of your child's beliefs, even if they are non-religious, and what a difference that can make. So, these are the sorts of things we can use data for. We can use it to create messages and programs in order to improve the lives of people in our communities. Also, we can use it for advocacy. And, I was just thinking about this. I mentioned that the rate of discrimination and stigma is much higher in very religious areas. And that really, blows a hole in the whole argument that religion is a positive force, doesn't it? If we're facing much higher discrimination and stigma in religious areas, then, how can you argue that religion is, a positive force and Christians treat people more kindly? You can't.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, we've often seen where Christians, apparently, Christian nationalists have many times stated that in public statements that freedom of religion means you have the right to worship Jesus in your own personal way, but that's it. I've seen a number of people say that freedom of religion applies only to Christians.
Yeah.
And not to anybody else. And so somebody challenged me just a little while ago to prove that atheists are the best, because I said that we were the best supporters of religious freedom. And the reasons that I say that is, one, American Atheist is all about defending the First Amendment, right? The Establishment Clause and the Prohibition Clause are like the first things on there. And we were kind of all about that. And other atheist organizations, again, freedom of religion, because you have to have the most basic right people can have is to think.
Their own mind, the right to their own mind.
Right, free thought. You can't get a more fundamental freedom than that. Your body may be enslaved, but as long as your mind can still think, that's it's not as bad as it could be. But the religion wants to take even that away.
Yeah.
And they want to deprive you of the ability to think freely. And so we have religious organizations that are trying to control what you think. And they offer the stick and the carrot, that you have to believe in the impossible promise that you have to be dead in order to get paid. And if you're not foolish enough to buy into that, then they give you the threat of the fate worse than death, right? Because they want to control your thought. They want you to make believe what you can't believe, and they want to criminalize you for thought crime.
And part of the problem is also they want to redefine what religious freedom means, right? They want to make it about Christian privilege. They want to make it about their idea of religious freedom is, I, as a Christian, get to do whatever I want. That's religious freedom. As opposed to
somebody in my family actually said that she is being oppressed by not being able to impose her religious doctrine onto other people.
That's absurd.
Specifically in reference to why gays can't get married, because her religion is against it. That means you can't do it.
Right. And that's not in any concept the founders had or anyone else of religious freedom. That is a reinvention to benefit, Christian nationalists by Christian nationalists. Real religious freedom means that we have the freedom to our own minds, and to those of us to engage in worship or to refrain from worship as we see fit. That's what it means. It does not mean that you get to impose your beliefs on other people. That's the opposite of religious freedom.
And religious groups call heresy and apostasy capital crimes, and they will impose a death sentence on that. And atheist people, now there are people who have coincidentally been atheists who have done terrible things, but never in the name of atheism. But as many famous philosophers have pointed out, in order for good people to do serious evil, that requires religion.
Yeah. I have seen that as well. I always like that quote.
Yeah. So on my statement about that atheists are the best supporters of religious freedom, anybody that wants to challenge that is welcome to put up a different group that can show that they've done better or more concerned with that. And I'm not even talking about in the past. I'm talking presently. So people want to go back to the 3rd century or whatever. I'm sorry. We're talking about now.
Well, look at Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the founder of American Atheists, right? She
took prayer out of school.
She took prayer out of schools. I mean, that's an incredible fight. That was an incredible fight. And her house was burned down. She was hounded everywhere. I mean, she was considered the most hated woman in America for what she went through to protect the separation of religion and government, which is an essential component of religious freedom.
And we have to clarify too that she did not take prayer out of school. She took forced prayer out of school.
Sure.
Where a Protestant teacher could then impose their religious beliefs onto Catholics, onto Jews and Muslims and Native Americans and anybody else who, regardless of the students' religious freedom rights.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have state officials imposing a state religion. And so she saved your children from that, and that's why you hate her.
Yeah. And today we're fighting in court for the same sorts of things to make sure that religious freedom is actually protected. Because you can't have religious freedom if the all-powerful state is taking a stance on religion and saying this religion is correct and this religion is not, or like religion gets all this favoritism and non-religion doesn't. You have to have a neutral arbiter in our society in order to have real religious freedom, and that's what we fight for.
And once you declare that it is a Christian country, everybody else is a second-class citizen.
Absolutely.
And then everybody that's not part of that particular denomination is a second-class citizen again.
Yeah.
So they'll talk all they want.
Purity, right? Then there's fighting over, oh, well, are you good enough in this category? Or we end up in a place like Iran, right, where you have religious police. So no, we don't want to go down that road.
Now they'll talk all they want about, Judeo-Christian this or that's in order to isolate the atheists and the Muslims at the same time.
Yeah.
But once they don't have that common enemy aspect, then all of a sudden the Judeo is gone, and then even the Christian is gone, because now it's particular which kind of Christian. Oh, well, they're Methodists, or they're what is it? They're Jehovah's Witnesses. They're not real Christians. They're Mormons or something.
Yeah.
They're not our tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
Yeah,
no idea of nuance.
That the founders wanted to push against, and that's why we have things like the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the Constitution. It's why we have religious freedom, is to prevent this sort of, strife. And we're defending it every day.
Yeah. So, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law even respecting the establishment of religion until we want to declare it a Christian country and teach the Bible in school. And then the Prohibition Clause, the second clause, nor restricting the free exercise thereof, unless we want to do a Muslim ban.
Right. Right.
Let's just go against everything that the First Amendment stands for.
That's one of the more troubling. You hit upon one of the more troubling aspects of what we're seeing, unfortunately, in the courts, is that there's not only are they eroding church-state separation, but they're doing it in a very biased way towards Christian beliefs. Like, for example, the Muslim ban is a good example, right? I mean, if you're not supposed to be, if you're supposed to be treating religion equally and, not making decisions based on animus, which is what they decided in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, right? Then at the same time, no one had more animus than Trump talking about the Muslim ban. He came out and, it was terrible, right? So how can you square those two arguments? And actually, I think it was Justice Ginsburg actually brought that up in her dissent, that this is not, you can't, these two arguments are not compatible. But because they're just sort of this favoritism towards Christian belief, that's unfortunately what we're seeing.
Okay. You have any closing thoughts with us? Did we cover everything, or is there something else we need to get out?
Well, no, I would love it if folks could help us promote this. We're trying to get it out as widely as possible. So if you take a look, it's www.secularsurvey.org, and there's some shareables and social media tweets that are prepared there. Help get out the survey as much as possible. If you want to talk about your own story of, either how you came to be an atheist, or if you, things you might have faced in your life, and help get that out, I think that would also be really great. So we're trying to promote this to raise awareness.
Outstanding. Allison Gill of American Atheists, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you so much.